I recently browsed through some old backup drives and I found this piece of isometric pixel art which I had created for a hobby game project back in 2012. So when I found this piece, I started to wonder if I maybe had learned a thing or two in the meantime. And I decided that I would give this isometric pixel building a little makeover. And the three main areas where I saw room for improvement were the shadows, the colors and the texturing. So what is wrong with the shadows here? Well, if we look more closely, then we see that there are some inconsistencies here. The front walls and the roof of the smaller part of the building, for example, indicate that there is light coming from this direction. The roof of the main structure indicates that there is light coming from this direction. And yeah, those two things don't necessarily contradict themselves, because it could mean that there is light coming from this diagonal direction hitting both surfaces at the same time. But if this is the case, then the shadow that the building casts onto the ground does not make any sense, right? That shadow looks more like the light is coming from that direction. So this is the major problem with the shadows in this scene. But also when you zoom in on some of the finer details, you see that this line over here, for example, is lit, while this line over here is dark, even though the light is supposed to come from that angle. So I decided to fix this and let the light come from this direction. Which means that the shadow on the ground needs to change its overall direction, and it should also show more of the details of the building that cast the shadow. So I created the shadow in a way that it shows the two separate floors of the building, and I also added those parts that indicate the railing on the upper floor. By the way, the image as I found it on my backup drive had no layer information, so every pixel initially was on the same layer. But I started to extract some parts, such as the background color and now also the new shadow structure, into separate layers to be able to move the shadow around more conveniently. I found the shadow of the roof a bit tricky to get down correctly. At this point I had it as a square block that sits on top of the other block, which might be correct when you see it as a flat 2D projection of the front face of the building onto the ground. But since my light direction was now supposed to be a bit diagonal, I found it hard to get my head around how it should look without recreating the shapes with the light source in the 3D modeling software such as Blender and study it there. In any case, it just didn't look very convincing yet. But eventually I solved this by cutting away some diagonal parts at the edges of the square block. And while this might not be a 100% accurate shadow projection, I felt that it still improved the readability of what this shape was supposed to be, because it mirrors the diagonal or triangular shapes that you also find on the roof itself. So from an artistic point of view, I felt this was good enough for now. The next big thing I tackled was the overall color palette of the image. The problem I saw with the colors was that they were rather saturated and flat, which made the building look a bit clean and sterile, and more like some children's toy rather than a real building. Also, I did not follow some basic color theory guidelines when I created this initial version. As a result, the colors looked less convincing, and I felt that they gave the image an overall amateur look. On the positive side though, the color values were actually okay, as everything is still quite readable when you look at it in grayscale mode. But to be honest, this was more a coincidence and not a result of my past me knowing exactly what I was doing here. So I started updating the color palette and made sure that I took the following basic rules into account. First, the darker shades of a color should decrease in saturation, and they should also move towards blue in the color spectrum. On the other hand, the lighter tints of a color should increase in saturation and move towards yellow in the color spectrum. The first part of the image where I applied those rules were the different shades of blue that I was using for the roof. Next, I took care of the green tones for the walls and the grass on the floor. I was then experimenting with the window frames, which I made grey at first, but later I changed them to brown to give them more of a wooden look. After that, I felt that the main color combination of green walls and blue roofs did not look that great after all. So I started to change the base color of the roof and gave it a more copper metallic rusty look. From all the shifting of colors in my palette, the 3 trash bins outside of the building definitely needed some care now too. Once this step was done, it was time for some shading and texturing. My goal here was to remove the rather clean look of the building and make it look more like a worn-down industrial warehouse. So I started by adding details on the left-facing walls of the building, the roof of the smaller structure, and on the 3 trash bins. Then I did the same for the right-facing walls and the window frames. Now, another problem was the tiling of the upper floor and the railing. In the original version, I had created way too much noise, with too many changes of colors in a too small area, so this also needed some rework. As you can see, adding details can improve an image, but also removing details sometimes is a good step to take. I was also checking the color values every now and then, which helped me with spotting some potential problems. In this case, the transition from the wall to the roof, because it was not as readable as it should be, so I fixed this by applying some more shading to the wall. After removing the details from the floor panels, I added some more simple shading and highlighting. And then I applied the same concept to the railing. I first removed all the details and made it a flat color, and then re-added some shading and highlighting where I saw fit. And after some more detailing of the door, I added some texture to the ground, which had been a flat grey color up until now. I went a bit overboard with this at first, which was now in conflict with the main shadow of the building, but after toning it down again, I was happy with the result. Also, the grass still needed some work, so I used the shading tool once more to create some more realistic looking texture. And after some finishing touches on the walls, this was the new and improved version. So now that this piece has been brought to the next level, it is ready to be put in an isometric pixel game with more such buildings, moving entities and animations. Speaking of animations, if you're interested in some general animation techniques for your game or pixel art project, check out this video next.